In this video, I want to show you 5 things that you can check on your gas furnace if it is not turning on before you call an HVAC contractor. These things are pretty easy to do, so let's get right into it. Okay, so before we get into these 5 tips, I want to just show you something that's critically important. If your furnace is not working, before you try and reset it, turning the switch off and then back on, make note of this little sight glass and look inside of here and see if you can see what code is flashing, because as soon as you reset the furnace, this code will erase itself. So you want to check this very first before you do anything else, and a lot of times that will give you an indication as to what's going on with your furnace. And then every single furnace is going to have this right here. This is for your diagnostic codes. So it tells you based on how many flashes that LED is flashing, it will give you a good idea as to what's going on with that furnace. Now, this is not directly going to tell you what's wrong. There could be multiple issues based on what code it is, but it'll tell you generally where to look. All right, so number 1 is easier than you might think, and this happens so often as an HVAC contractor. We roll up to a job, they say, my gas furnace isn't working, and it ends up being a super clogged air filter. So the first thing you want to do is check your air filter and see what it looks like. If it is clogged like this, that could very well be the reason why your gas furnace is not working. And the reason behind that is if you're not getting enough air to go through here and through the heat exchanger, it's going to overheat, and there is sensors in here. In fact, this sensor right here on the firewall basically tells you if your system is overheating, it will turn everything down. You have to have enough airflow flowing through that heat exchanger in order for the furnace to keep running, and your filter is critical. So first of all, just make sure that your filter looks good. If it's dirty, replace the filter and reset the system. So normally you'd have a switch right here. You can flip it off, flip it back on. This one has a plug, so I'm just gonna unplug it, leave it unplugged for 10-15 seconds, plug it back in, and see if that does the trick. Now, while we're on the topic of air filtration and airflow, something else that is critical is if you have had a dirty air filter for years and years, you could have very well clogged the coil. So I'm going to show you from the top here. This is obviously a demo furnace, so there's no safety hazards here. Obviously, you would see a vent and ductwork here in any other situation. But this is what the coil looks like. So typically it's going to be an A coil. As you can see, it's kind of shaped like an A. Sometimes they're shaped like an N. But right underneath this top plate, I'll actually take this off so you can physically see what it looks like. So now that I have that off, you can see clear down in here. You can actually probably see that's the heat exchanger right under that metal plate. So what is happening is air is being pulled through the return, it's blowing through the heat exchanger, and it's blowing into the apex of that coil. So right inside of here, this can easily get plugged up with debris and stuff that goes past the filter, and that could be an issue with your heating season. So if you look under there and you see that it's filthy dirty, I have a separate video that shows how to clean it. This part isn't as common because it takes a lot of debris to get this clogged, but it has happened in the past. It has allowed not enough airflow to come through and caused the furnace to overheat, and that will cause your furnace not to come on. So the next thing I want to talk about is the flame sensor. This is a very, very common thing, but basically the objective of this sensor is to sense a flame. So when the furnace kicks on, when you first see a flame here in the burners, and the flame then after a couple seconds turns off, that's probably because the flame sensor is dirty. Now this is really easy to do. You simply take one screw off, take this flame sensor out, clean it, put it back in, and if your flames stay on at that point, then you are good to go, and that's as easy as that. A lot of calls are those first 2 things, dirty air filter and dirty flame sensor. Number 3 is going to be your blower motor. This is actually a pretty common thing. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm diagnosing a blower motor, make sure the switch is turned off or it's unplugged, make sure that your door switch is disengaged, and all we're going to do is reach in back here and spin this blower motor. I'm going to pull this filter out just to show you what we're doing here. So basically we're just going to reach in and we're going to spin that blower wheel. If that spins pretty freely and there doesn't seem to be any resistance, then your blower motor is probably not bad. If it is bad, it will probably be kind of seized up and it'll be hard to spin. So if this has resistance, you probably need a new blower motor. But something else that you can check is the capacitor, and it looks like this right here. Now be very cautious because these can retain energy. So again, make sure your power is completely turned off. And it's very easy to do once you know what you're doing. So you're gonna take an insulated screwdriver and you're just gonna touch these two leads together, and that's going to discharge that capacitor to make sure that you will not receive any sort of electrocution. I've never been popped by one of these. I've heard of some having been popped before, but just be cautious. So next we're gonna pull these leads off, and I'm gonna physically show you how to check this with a voltmeter. Okay, so now that we've got our capacitor pulled out, we can see that it is a 20 UF. Sometimes these will be a 10, a 7.5. This one in particular is a 20. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go over to this setting right here. Looks like an arrow and a T. And then all we're gonna do is put one lead on one of these contacts and one on the other, and we'll see what our reading is. So for this guy, we have 18.8. So we're a little bit below 20, but as you'll notice right here, we have plus or minus 5%. So 5% of 20 is 1%. So we're actually below the threshold, and this capacitor is actually bad. This may have still functioned. It's just below the 5%. But if yours is reading significantly lower, or if it says OL on here, then your capacitor is absolutely bad. Some things you can also check for is if these prongs are not pointing straight up, if they're kind of mushroomed out and they're kind of pointing diagonally, that's a telltale sign that it's bad. Or if it's leaking fluid, or if it just looks terrible, it's probably bad. These are very cheap. You can buy these on Amazon. Just make sure that your rating and voltage matches, and you're good to go. Now, while we're looking at the board on this older furnace, you'll notice that there is a 3 amp fuse. So if your furnace is not doing anything, this is something that I would absolutely check. I'm just throwing this in with the blower motor for number 3. So if this fuse is blown, you'll see some black discoloration on the plastic. You'll see this little Z in the middle, that little metal piece will be broken, and there will not be a connection there. That's how you know that this fuse is blown. Sometimes it is as easy as replacing a fuse, and it's something that customers can totally do themselves and save a ton of money. Number 4 has to do with the inducer motor. Now, just the obvious things, if you go down here to your furnace, this is the first thing that will come on. And when this is running, it should sound pretty smooth. You shouldn't hear any metal on metal, grinding, things of that nature. If you hear that, probably that's going to be your culprit, because if you have something that's slowing this down and not allowing enough air to be pushed out, your pressure switch is going to be tripped, and that's going to cause the furnace not to turn on. Now, something else I want to throw in with this is if there's a restriction in your exhaust or your intake, that can definitely cause the furnace not to run. I've seen hornet's nests and dirt daubers build inside of an exhaust flue, and that causes not enough air to either go out or come in, and that can definitely be the culprit. So what I'd recommend is going out to your vent, locate a PVC vent that's coming out of the exterior of the home, and see if that is clogged, and your fix could be as easy as that. And lastly, number 5 is going to be the igniter. This is a pretty common thing, and the purpose of the igniter is when you first turn on the furnace or turn on your thermostat, the first thing that'll happen is the inducer comes on, and after the inducer's been on for about 30 seconds or so, you'll start to see a glowing orange glow in the burner area. That is your igniter. And the purpose of that is it gets cherry red, and then the next thing that happens is the gas valve will open and it will send gas, and there's no spark needed unless you have a spark igniter, but that is so hot that it will ignite that gas that's going through it, and then after you have ignition, the igniter will lose voltage and your furnace will be running. Now, if you go down to your furnace and you hear the inducer running, but you never see that orange glow, then you know that there's an issue. The spark igniters rarely go bad. It's mainly these hot surface igniters that go bad. So I'm going to show you what they look like. It's just one screw, and it typically has 2 wires. The one that has one singular wire, that's, as we talked about before, that's going to be your flame sensor. All right, so this is what your hot surface igniter is going to look like. Again, it just has 2 wires, and this little metal tip will get glowing red. These are not nearly as susceptible to breaking, but you want to avoid touching these. This is just a scrap furnace, that's why I'm just touching it. But the ones that look like this are very, very brittle. So if you look inside of the burner assembly and you see some broken bits down there sitting on the bottom, that's probably your flame sensor. And what you can do is actually replace it with one of these. I'll leave a link in the video description of a universal hot surface igniter. All you have to do is make sure you put it in the same hole as the old one and make sure that it's lined up with the side of the burner to where it will ignite, and it's as easy as that. They come with wire nuts, so you can actually cut this right here and just wire nut one wire to each. The polarity doesn't matter, and it's as easy as that. I'm going to do a separate video on how to upgrade your igniter to one of these, as these are far superior than the other ones that are extremely brittle. Well guys, those are the 5 things that I recommend checking on your gas furnace if it's not working. Obviously there's many other things that it could be, but overall a gas furnace is pretty basic. There's not a ton of stuff unless you have a really sophisticated one, but you really should go to that code plate and see what code it's showing, and that will kind of narrow it down for you. Now, if you're interested in seeing how a gas furnace works and just expanding your knowledge on HVAC in general, the refrigeration cycle, how equipment is oriented, the very basics of HVAC, you can find my HVAC training course right here. It walks you through the very basics. If you know nothing about your HVAC system and you just want to learn, or even if you want to get into an entry-level position at an HVAC company, this is going to be an awesome training course. Now, if you also want to get remote support to diagnose your gas furnace to save money and not have to pay someone and to learn what to look for, you can find my remote membership right here, and I hope we can help you out. Until next time, you guys be safe. Later.